Right now, a new kind of economy is being built, not on Earth, but above it, and it's already worth over $20 trillion. While we focus on wars, elections, and markets down here, nations and corporations are quietly joining forces in orbit. They're building networks of satellites, digital currencies, and data systems that could one day control how money moves on Earth. This isn't a science project. It's a financial revolution happening in the one place with no borders, no taxes, and almost no laws. On paper, it looks like international cooperation. In reality, it's a global race for control, a race to own the next financial system before anyone else even sees it coming. Because whoever builds the economy above Earth will decide how the economy below it works. What most people still see as space exploration has quietly turned into something far more strategic. Behind every satellite launch, every new partnership, and every announcement of international cooperation, there's a deeper objective taking shape. Control over the infrastructure that will define the next global economy. Governments call it science. Investors call it innovation. But the truth is, space has become the world's next geopolitical frontier. And this time, it's not about flags or footprints. It's about ownership of the systems that move data, currency, and communication across the planet. The competition didn't start with rockets. It started with treaties. In 2020, the United States introduced the Artemis Accords, a framework that invited allied nations to cooperate on lunar exploration and future resource extraction. More than 30 countries have signed on so far. On paper, it's about transparency and the peaceful use of space. In practice, it's a coalition, one that ensures America and its partners define the rules of trade, mining, and navigation beyond Earth before anyone else can. China took a different path. Under the umbrella of the Belt and Road Initiative, Beijing began extending its influence into orbit. It built the Tiangong space station, launched joint missions with Pakistan, and opened space data sharing agreements with countries in Africa, South America, and the Middle East. Quietly, that network has started to look like a counterweight to the Western Alliance, a kind of BRICS space where data, launch access, and communications are shared under a non-Western framework. Europe, too, is finding its own ground, or rather, its own orbit. The European Space Agency has turned into a financial alliance as much as a scientific one. Satellites for weather, navigation, and defense are now being linked through a common digital backbone called IRIS-2, a multi-billion euro system designed to keep Europe autonomous from American and Chinese networks. These alliances aren't about cooperation for the sake of science anymore. They're about securing economic territory measured not in land, but in data and satellites. Each group is laying the foundation for its own financial ecosystem in orbit, built on satellites, AI-driven data trade, and cross-border communication systems that will eventually carry trillions of dollars in value. The numbers tell the story clearly. The global space economy was valued at around $630 billion in 2024. Within a decade, it's projected to surpass $1.8 trillion. But those are only the direct revenues: launches, manufacturing, satellites. When you add the data markets, digital transactions, and orbital mining rights forming around them, the long-term projection climbs beyond $20 trillion. And this time, that wealth isn't just flowing through Earth's financial systems. It's being built in a place where the rules are still being written. That's why every major power is moving fast. Not necessarily to explore space, but to anchor influence there. Because once an orbital network is established, whether for communications, digital trade, or even blockchain banking, it's almost impossible to replace. Whoever builds the infrastructure owns the infrastructure. Private corporations have become the quiet backbone of this race. Companies like SpaceX, Blue Origin, Axiom, and OneWeb are not just service providers. They're becoming de facto operators of global communication highways. The same rocket that carries internet satellites for schools also carries encrypted payment nodes for global banks. Every new constellation of satellites extends their reach over the world's data. The more data flows through those channels, the more leverage they gain. Not through governments, but through access. In the past, control over trade meant controlling shipping routes or oil pipelines. In the 21st century, it means controlling information corridors. And those corridors now orbit above the planet. And that's where the tension lies. Nations depend on private networks for their own defense and economy. But those networks are owned by companies that answer to shareholders, not governments. When you combine that with cross-border alliances, the result is a system of power that no single nation truly controls. In diplomatic circles, this is starting to be called the orbital order, an emerging framework of influence built not by law, but by technology and capital. Each alliance builds its own satellites, its own data channels, its own standards of communication. At first glance, it looks like progress, but behind the scenes, it's a struggle to define who sets the terms of the digital economy once it leaves Earth's jurisdiction. Even within alliances, competition is everywhere. The United States and its partners debate how much private industry should be allowed to dominate orbital infrastructure. Europe wants autonomy. Japan wants reliability. India wants access. China wants control. Every player frames its agenda as cooperation, but the undertone is the same. Nobody wants to be left out of the next global system. The space race of the 1960s was about prestige. This one is about monetary architecture. The systems being launched now, satellites for navigation, financial synchronization, blockchain nodes in orbit, are not just tools, they're the early frameworks of a new kind of economy. Imagine a banking network that doesn't rely on terrestrial servers, or an international trading platform that operates independently of any single government's regulation. These are not futuristic ideas, they're already in development. Orbital data storage and quantum encrypted transactions are being tested right now. The goal is simple: build a financial system that can survive even if Earth's systems fail, or if politics on the ground make transactions impossible. For nations, that's an opportunity and a threat. An opportunity to gain independence from existing power structures, but also a risk that their influence could be replaced by whoever controls this new orbital network. That's why, quietly, sovereign wealth funds from the Middle East, Asia, and Europe have begun investing heavily in space infrastructure. They're buying into launch companies, satellite manufacturers, and data firms. On the surface, it looks like investment diversification, but strategically, it's insurance, a way to secure a share of the system that might one day replace Earth-based finance altogether. The danger is that, unlike the internet, this system won't be open, it won't be public. It will be fragmented, divided by alliances, by treaties, by private control. Instead of one internet, we could end up with multiple orbital economies, each governed by different rules, each holding the power to exclude others. That's why this race is invisible to most people. It's not televised. It's negotiated in conference rooms, written in memorandums, and executed through launches that look routine. Yet, the consequences could be immense. The infrastructure being placed in orbit today will define who holds financial dominance for decades to come. Because when money begins to flow through orbit, whoever manages those channels won't just control communication, they'll control trust. And in any economy, trust is everything. By the time the public notices what's really being built, the architecture will already be in place. When that happens, the old systems, the global banks, the clearinghouses, even some governments, may find that the most valuable markets in history are operating just outside their reach. This is why experts call it the invisible race. Not because it's hidden from sight, but because it's disguised as cooperation. Every mission looks peaceful, every agreement sounds positive, but beneath the language of partnership lies a quiet struggle for the foundation of tomorrow, S-world economy. Because once these alliances connect into a single orbital network, the real question, one, to be who owns the satellites, it'll be who owns the system they create. To understand how this new economy works, you have to stop thinking about space as a place and start seeing it as an infrastructure layer. Above the clouds, an entirely new economic grid is forming. Every satellite, every relay, every data transfer acts as a node in what could become the most valuable network in human history. The world already depends on orbit more than most people realize. GPS, satellite internet, banking synchronization, weather systems, even stock market timing, all of it relies on orbital links. Without them, planes lose guidance, ships drift, and global markets freeze within seconds. The digital economy already hangs on a thread stretched 36,000 kilometers above Earth. Now imagine expanding that system, not just for communication, but for finance itself. That's what's happening quietly right now. A new monetary framework is emerging, one that doesn't pass through Wall Street or Shanghai. It exists between satellites, blockchain networks, and AI transaction hubs orbiting beyond national control. Economists call it the orbital economy. Some prefer a term that feels closer to the truth: the new Bretton Woods. In 1944, world leaders rebuilt global finance in a small New Hampshire town. That meeting created the IMF, the World Bank, and the rules that still govern trade today. What's happening in orbit now is the 21st century's silent version of that moment. Only this time, no one is voting, and no one's being invited. Instead of gold or dollar pegs, this new system is built on data, satellite networks, and off-planet resources. The architects are a mix of governments, private corporations, and sovereign funds, shaping what could become the first borderless financial grid in history. And here's the simplest way to see it. If the internet connected the world's information, the orbital economy connects its value. The $20 trillion system unfolds across 6 major sectors, each already worth billions, and together forming the backbone of this new economy. First, the launch industry. Companies like SpaceX, Rocket Lab, and China's KSK aren't just transporters, they're gatekeepers. Every payload represents future data and leverage. The cheaper launches become, the more the orbital economy scales. And as costs fall, access expands, faster than any regulation can keep up. Second, satellite constellations. Beyond internet coverage, they'll soon handle encrypted financial traffic and government communication. Whoever owns those constellations owns the world's new data highways. Third, space mining. Still experimental, but already legalized in the US, Japan, China, and Luxembourg. Whoever extracts rare metals or helium-3 first could fuel quantum computing and advanced energy, industries that define nations. Fourth, orbital energy. Not the solar grid itself, but the financial layer around it. Energy traded in beams, not barrels. Brokers, insurers, and digital settlements forming a new market where power is currency. Fifth, space-based data and AI. Satellites already map trade flows and resources. Soon, orbital AI will analyze it in real time, selling intelligence directly to governments and corporations. Whoever controls that pipeline won't just predict markets, they'll steer them. Sixth, sovereign digital currencies. Central bank crypto systems are already testing cross-border links. The next phase is connecting them through orbital infrastructure, where money moves instantly, beyond SWIFT or sanctions. Together, these pillars form the $20 trillion equation, a system merging physical assets, data, and capital into one borderless network. The nations building it aren't just innovating, they're rewriting how wealth itself moves. At the center are institutions most people never notice. The Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, Singapore's Temasek, Norway's Sovereign Fund, Chinese state vehicles. To them, orbit isn't exploration, it's real estate. Every kilometer of altitude is leverage. Control one slice of orbital communication, and you control billions in commerce and security. In boardrooms from Zurich to Riyadh, quiet deals, finance launch firms, data satellites, and orbital insurance. Together, they sketch the first blueprint of a parallel financial order, one that could operate independently of Earth's central banks. Some compare it to the early internet. But the internet decentralized power. This might do the opposite. Because access to orbit is limited, whoever gets there first writes the rules. Everyone else pays rent to participate. That is the question dividing analysts. Will the orbital economy become a public network for humanity, or a private club for the powerful? Evidence leans toward the latter. In 2024, the Global Space Finance Forum projected that by 2035, 70% of orbital infrastructure will be privately owned. Decisions about global data flow and financial routing will rest not with governments, but with boards of directors. The risks are obvious. A single glitch, hack, or dispute could ripple through orbital systems and freeze markets on Earth in minutes. If the internet collapsing can crash economies, imagine when the financial core itself lives in orbit. Military agencies are already adapting. The US Space Force, Russia's Aerospace Command, and China EOS Strategic Support Force now list orbital financial protection as a defense priority, the safeguarding of space-based monetary infrastructure. In plain terms, money itself is becoming a target. For strategists, the orbital economy is a weapon of influence. You don't invade territory, you own the infrastructure that decides who stays online, who gets power, who can pay. Future wars may not destroy cities, they may disable economies from 36,000 kilometers away. And yet the rewards are too massive to ignore. Every major power knows that whoever shapes this system will write the constitution of the post-Earth economy. For the US, dominance means ensuring its tech giants, SpaceX, Amazon, Google, Lockheed, own the backbone. For China, it means building a self-contained rival network. For Europe, independence. For the rest, survival in a world where financial sovereignty could depend on orbital access. Some analysts predict the first space IMF within 2 decades. A coalition of corporations and sovereign investors managing orbital insurance, credit, and stabilization. It may never have a flag, but its influence could outweigh any terrestrial bank. If that happens, national currencies may shrink beside orbital credit systems. Digital units backed not by GDP, but by satellite bandwidth, energy capacity, or rare metal reserves. Think tanks across Washington, Brussels, and Beijing are already modeling it. And it raises the question no one can yet answer. What happens to national power when wealth itself no longer touches the ground? The implications are staggering. A $20 trillion economy, operating beyond borders, controlled by those who own the satellites that power it. An economy immune to taxation, sanctions, or oversight. The rest of the world, people, companies, nations, will depend on it for connection, trade, and energy. By the time most realize what's happened, the system will already be running. Just as the internet quietly reshaped society before we grasped its reach, the orbital economy will redefine control itself, not through ideology or weapons, but through invisible finance moving silently above us. Because in this new era, money won't flow through banks or borders. It will orbit, and whoever controls the orbit controls the world.